So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. This is the first in our In Conversation series for 2021. I hope you're all staying safe and well. And as you know, we are trying to make sure that you have opportunities for networking and to meet each other. So while we're not in person, this is the next best thing. And so we're delighted to have you here along today. I'm going to say to you at the outset just a few housekeeping details before we formally kick off. So you'll see on the top right-hand side of the screen, there's a Q&A function and there's a chat function. So the Q&A function, we would just ask you to post any of your questions, and our guest today, Feargal O'Rourke, Managing Partner at PwC, and I will try to address those questions as we go along. So try the chat function if you want to make comments for that, but for questions, particularly if you can use the Q&A function, that would be great. And just to say at the outset as well, you've noticed that we're now moving to a new platform called Remo, and just a little bit of background as to why we did that. It actually helps in providing a very good virtual networking facility. And this is something I know across all the programs that you're asking for any opportunity to network. And so we decided to try this, and we're finding it very useful. So we've decided to introduce it to the In Conversation series. And what will happen is at 1 o'clock when we finish, you will automatically be transferred into a networking room. Now that might sound awful for people who don't like networking, but it's actually okay. So what will happen is you'll find yourself in a virtual room at a table, and you can bounce from table to table literally by double clicking on your seat. So when I was testing it out, it felt to me like I was booking a seat on a plane. If I wanted to change the seat, I just double clicked and I changed the seat. And they were the good old days, of course, when we were able to book seats on planes. But anyway, so we're going to ask you to join us for half an hour, and Feargal and I will be jumping in as well and mixing. And just try it out, give it a go, try it out, and we'd love to get your feedback after the session to see what you think. So that's the housekeeping details. So on to the session today. So as I say, delighted to have our first of our In Conversation series for 2021. And I'm even more delighted to be joined by Feargal O'Rourke today from PwC, Managing Partner of PwC. Now, I'm not going to say everything about Feargal and his profile, because we wouldn't actually get a chance to talk about the subject, but just in brief what I will tell you. So Feargal has been managing partner for PwC since 2015. He was unanimously re-elected for his second term in 2019. He has 25 years of partner experience advising multinationals investing in Ireland, and more broadly advising on Irish, European and global issues. He acts for major companies in the tech sector, particularly on the west coast of the US, and he also acts for a number of Irish public and state companies. So a lot of experience there, Feargal. You're not a man to let the grass grow under your feet, it seems. So we're absolutely delighted to have you here today. And the topic for discussion today is an interesting one. It's called There is Power in Kindness. So different type of business topic for today. So Feargal, welcome. And we might just kick off by asking, what do you understand kindness to be? What does it mean for you? And what does it mean in a business context particularly?
Well, I have to add first that you left out I'm a graduate of UCD, of course.
Oh, yes.
That's a proud Athlone man. I suppose, look, I'll preface my comments by saying I'm not holding myself out as a guru here on leadership. And I think, a lot of us learn things when we're in college, and you learn about, strategy, or culture eats strategy for breakfast, and execution is 90% of strategy and all this. But it's not until you actually lead an organization and you make mistakes and you learn things that work well, you learn. So I'm hoping what I'll pass on is my lived experience as leader of a 3,000 plus organization over the last 6 years, which have encompassed a broad gamut of fantastic growth and then a major crisis. For me, kindness, I suppose, I'd probably call it authentic empathy, because we often talk as leaders about putting yourself in the other person's shoes. And for me, that sense of, I was one of those people who, I'd say to people, leave it on my desk, I'll get to it. And I always felt if there were another 2 hours in every day, I'd achieve even more. Once I got into leadership roles, I realized that my time would be much more effective if I can turn the dial 5 or 10% on people's sense of belonging to the organization, on people's sense of pride, on people feeling an affinity with the organization. If I could manage to engender that with my leadership team and embed it in the culture of the organization, I would be more effective. So for me, I've always had an interest in people. I come from a political family, and there's nothing more getting involved with people and knocking on doors looking for votes and understanding what the mood of the people is. And I suppose growing up in a family where politics was always there, you become very used to dealing with people. And for me, there's that story, and many people may have come across it, that, in his inauguration speech in 1960, John F. Kennedy said they would put a man on the moon before the end of the decade was out. And when he was visiting Cape Canaveral a couple of years later, the story goes, he asked a guy sweeping the floor, what was his job here? And the guy said, my job is to put a man on the moon. And there was that, at one level, that's about unity of purpose. But at another level, that individual felt invested in the organization. And I'm sure he felt invested in the organization because, as I always say, I don't care in PwC who you are. I don't care if you're just in the door. I don't care if you're sweeping the basement. I don't care if you're the 7th floor. Every single person has hopes and dreams and aspirations, and work is just one part of their life. And if you can understand that person, what they value, what makes them tick, what they have pride in, if you have that authentic empathy, and you can recognize what's important to them, and you can come over to their side of the table. So kindness sometimes, I don't think kindness is an alternative to, say, for example, decisiveness. I think you can be very decisive and kind. I think kindness is just about understanding what drives your people, what makes them proud, what makes them own that sense of belonging. And if you can unlock, so kindness, at one level, it's about treating everybody as an equal. But if you can master that, and it sounds almost contrived when I say it, but if you have that skill of understanding what makes people tick and empathizing with it, you will unlock the potential of that person. You will have, the more loyal, because I always say, at one level, being an employer is pretty straightforward. You recruit really good people, you train them well, you pay them relatively well, you give them interesting work. But there is a sense of belonging if they have that sense of belonging. So a long-winded way of saying kindness, it's not an X factor. It's about creating that sense of belonging and having that person feel you are treating them as a real person and equal. I always remember early on, I had as a very difficult partner discussion to have when I was just taken over as leader, and it went ding dong for an hour. And at the end, the person said, I still don't agree with the decision you're making about me, but you've treated me like a human being. And I went home that night and I said, that's the nicest thing anybody said about me for a long time.
Yeah. So, and when you talk about the authentic side of it, so, in that situation, for example, the empathy was there in the sense you were putting yourself in his shoes and, obviously imparting, a fairly difficult thing to do. But at the same time, obviously it was received with a certain degree of respect for how you handled it. Where does authenticity come in then, Feargal, to kindness? Where do you see that coming in?
I think it has to be genuine. I remember years ago working with somebody and, they come in and saying, how did you get on at the weekend? And before you even had the answer out, they were moving on. I'd like you to do this. And you never really felt they were interested. I think authenticity in that example is around genuine interest. And no more than when I chat to my clients, I am interested in how they're getting through this pandemic. If they've got kids my age, how are their kids getting on? Are their parents still alive? How are they dealing with that if their parents are down the country? So I think having a genuine interest in people is the authentic box. You're not just asking the question to get, let's get the chit chat out of the way. I love the opening parts of meetings where you are actually having that discussion around how are things going, how are you managing this. And what I found, funny enough, in this time of pandemic is people are much more open about the challenges they're facing. People are actually, at one level, I an avatar or a weather vane for the office. I'm conscious of the responsibility I have to be optimistic, to be positive, to be leading from the front. But, there are times it's good to chat about, some people say leadership is lonely. It is at times, but I'm privileged. I think I have the best job in town. I work with brilliant people, brilliant companies. I've traveled the world in my role. I've been to the White House twice. I've been to the Kremlin. I'm inordinately well paid for the value that I add to society. So I'm privileged to have the role. But there are times you have to chat to somebody who's done the role as well, kind of be able to say, geez, I'm struggling with this, or I'm having problems with that.
So one of the things that strikes me about what you're saying there in terms of authenticity, it's also that kind of, can you show vulnerability when you're in that type of leadership role? There always is this sort of sense that as leaders, we have to be incredibly strong no matter what's going on, and that any signs of vulnerability could be a weakness. But from your sense, in terms of kindness, it almost seems to equate with, there has to be some level, as you say, of, well, you're a human at the end of the day. You're not a machine.
Yeah, and let's kind of dissect that vulnerable bit, because there's two elements to that. First of all, when I picked a leadership team, if I look at the deed of PwC, I have all the powers of a benign dictator. And when I was elected managing partner, I get to pick a cabinet, effective and executive team. And I picked people the first time around in 2015 who hadn't voted for me, but I wanted the best team possible. But one of the things I said early on is, look, I want us to have our rows around this table, not to bring it outside the room. And I want to hear contrary views. And I picked the people because they certainly weren't yes people. And the first bit of vulnerability goes to being able to say, as I do, I'm not sure what the right answer is here. Or I think it's this, but can we noodle it out a bit? Or showing, as I've done in the past, I come into the room with the view, but that view can be changed around. Now, don't get me wrong, there are times I come into the view and I believe it's the right answer. But I think part of that vulnerability comes from accepting that you're not always right, and that people talk about imposter syndrome. Everybody has imposter syndrome at some time. I took over as managing partner. There were times where I was like, God, do I have the skill set here to do this job? And I think that vulnerability is from, I remember working with one guy once, and he had this amazing, uncanny belief in himself that he was always right. And I used to, at times, I was jealous almost of this air of certainty. But as life went on, I became, I nearly am glad I don't have it, because I think at a first level of vulnerability, you have to be able to say, I'm wrong, I'm not sure about this, I'm willing to change my mind. Now, that can't happen the whole time, or else, what are you doing in the role? But there have to be times where your leadership team see you as capable of changing your mind, of being uncertain because you don't have all the data you need, or you don't have all the experiences you need to do it. I think that's the first part of vulnerability. I'm conscious, though, that's, to my leadership team, I'm happy to be open like that. And this really came home over the last 12 months. But when you're leading a large organization, a large percentage of the people want to be led. They want somebody to say, tell me what to do and I'll do it. And they look to you for leadership. And I think in that role, I have to I'm a natural optimist. I come from a family of optimists, but I think they look to you for leadership. And I remember early on, my predecessor Ronan Murphy, who I'm friendly with, saying to me, people look to you. Are you in good form? Because if you're in good form, the firm is doing well. Are you in bad form? Are you looking worried? So I'm conscious there is a shield you have to put on when you're out there. You have to be authentic and you have to be yourself. And I like to think if you talk to more people, they would tell you that, what you see in the coffee queue when you're chatting to folks is the very same as when I'm doing anything. But I think in your role as leader, you can be vulnerable to your leadership team, but you've got to be the person putting the flag on the faraway hill and saying, that's where we're going, follow me, and it's moving people where they may not want to move or where they may not recognize they've got to get to that hill. And for that, you do need to have a persona which radiates some level of confidence in you. Like, during the crisis, I would have said, look, dark days, you don't deny the obvious. So I would have said, dark days are ahead, but we have a plan. We're going to execute that plan. I'm going to come back to you in a month's time. I'm going to update you. I'm going to come back to you in 2 months' time, in 3 months' time. So authentic is about communication, it's about transparency. But the vulnerability is important to be able, like, Danuta Gray, some of you may remember, she used to run O2 in Ireland. Danuta, I remember saying to me one time early on, I was talking to her about when I took over the role, and she said, on your leadership team, you need one person who will call you out on your bullshit. And she's absolutely right. So vulnerability is important, but it's part of that authenticity. You
know, you're saying that, and it would be true that there can be a lot of people in senior roles, and there is that maybe air, as you say, of sometimes maybe arrogance, but sometimes just as maybe confidence that they exude, that, you know,
big difference. Right. Arrogance and confidence, yeah.
Yes. How do you know, let's say you're in an organization and you're working for reporting to somebody like that, or you have somebody on your team that you're trying to manage. How do you break that down in terms of actually, you know, bringing them to the table more in terms of not necessarily always believing that they are right? How do you manage around that?
Yeah, I would tend to be a direct, like, you know, a lot of these things, the one-to-one meetings are just as important as the group leadership team meeting. So we have a leadership team meeting. We have 2 meetings a month. We split it into 2, one on operational issues and one on strategic issues, which actually was a great innovation. But I would then have one-to-ones on a monthly basis with my leadership team, and then they'd be informally, I'd be talking to most of them every day. I think if I felt there was somebody who was, you know, thankfully it hasn't happened, but who was kind of been arrogant or else was so convinced of their own self-belief that they were always right, I would deal with that in the one-to-one. And I would say, look, you just can't be right. And you would try and get instances of where it doesn't work. But I think the culture a leader, and I mean, you know, a lot of the people on this webcast are leaders themselves. The culture a leader sets usually stops that behavior settling in. And God, I worked with a partner many years ago, Tygo Donoghue. He was my first boss, and you know, he described leadership a little bit as monkey see, monkey do. That you ape the behaviors of the leaders you've worked for. And I think a lot of it is that you spot the good things, but a lot of it is the culture that they permit. So, you know, if you say one thing but you permit another, you've ruined the culture. Yeah. And I think, you know, at our leadership teams, we have some ding-dong discussions where we're at it hammer and tongs. But actually, at the end of the meeting, we're able to have a bit of a laugh, or we always try and go out once a quarter. When you were able to go out once a quarter, we go out for a meal, the 10 of us, and we shoot the breeze and we have a laugh. So that the importance of personal relationships and being able to have direct discussions is massively important. And going back to that confidence thing, some of the attendees will know Patrick Kennedy. He's former chief executive of Paddy Power, now governor of the Bank of Ireland. I remember him saying to me one time when I just took over, he said, the job of the chief executive is to be the most positive, optimistic person in the organization. The job of the rest of the executive team is to rein him or her back in a little bit. And as I say to my executive team, I'm holding up my part of the bargain here. I'm the one putting flags on Faroe Hill saying, yeah, you know, charge, here we go, you know. Yeah.
And I suppose, I mean, in the last 12 months, Feargal, you know, in terms of what you've seen in terms of this power and kindness and how are you seeing it amongst, not in just PwC, but amongst your client organizations? Where are you seeing the benefits of it now in terms of how the crisis has been dealt with by companies?
Yeah, I talk a lot to chief executives and chairmen and CFOs over the last 9 or 10 months. And there's a couple of themes definitely emerging as I'd see it. And there's probably 2 ones that stand out in particular for me. One is those companies that invested in digital have really prospered in this. And, you know, we went on a journey starting about 2.5 years ago, becoming the most digitally enabled professional service firm in the country. And it's not just about spending money on technology. It's not just about training and giving the best training to everybody. It's not just about giving a mobile device to everybody. It's about a cultural empowerment of people. And we made we created this digital academy, and we decided we weren't going to make attendance mandatory. And pretty quickly people realized, hey, this is good for me. It's not just good for the organization. If I'm upskilling as a person, and we now have 95% of our people have gone on a digital academy on something that is not mandatory in the office, because it not just was good for the business, it was good for them. So that that cultural empowerment of saying to people, you can be the best you can be. We want you to be the best you can be. We're going to train you. And even if you leave and go somewhere else, we want you to have experienced the digital culture in PwC. And it was, we were pushing this from the top down, but it started to come from the bottom up as well. So the firms that invested in digital, and, I spoke to one chief executive of what I would have thought would have been a very savvy organization. And I remember him saying to me, 2/3 of his people only had desktops. And therefore, they had to get a dispensation to be an essential work so they keep going. I was amazed by this. But the other thing I've noticed is those businesses that invested in culture and values and really walked the walk and talked the talk and did everything around culture and values the last 2 years, they're the ones that have prospered as well. And certainly, we've over the last 6 years, we've built a culture around our values, our 5 values. And the number of people have come back to me and said, yeah, you talked a lot in the good times, but we've seen you walk the walk. And that for me meant a lot. It meant that values aren't, puppies are not just for Christmas, they're for life. Culture and values are not just for good times, they're for tough times as well. And I suppose the sort of things we'd have done culturally around much more transparency, much more communications, really trying to be level with people. And it's just one example. We'd be fairly private around the profitability of partnerships, as most partnerships are. And, early on in my communications with our people in the first month, I said, look, we've established a number of principles here. The first principle we've established is we're going to take long-term decisions, not short-term decisions. So are we going to cut back on graduate recruitment? Absolutely not. The second thing I said is that partners, as the economic owners of the business, are going to bear the brunt of the financial crisis. And I said, what do I mean by that? I said, partner income is going to be down 20 to 30%. Am I looking for sympathy? No, I just want to give you a context. And the number of people came back and said, that was refreshing. And the third thing I said then was, for as long as possible and as far as possible, we are going to protect people's jobs and we're going to protect people's livelihoods. We're not going to cut salaries. And again, the feedback we got from that was, it took the pressure off. People then could say, they're not worrying about, God, am I going to have my wages cut? Am I going to have my salaries cut? Am I going to lose my job? We said to people, and every month I went and update them how we were doing. And, we're on the uptake again. In fact, the abyss we thought we were looking into back in March, April, we thought our business could drop 20, 25%. For calendar 20, we thought our business would grow by 7%. We actually have fallen by 6%. It's a swing of maybe 45 million, but it's not the end of the world. We'll manage. But that authenticity about communicating, not being blindly optimistic, but kind of telling it as it is, but also people as leaders, as people in this webcast are, if you leave a vacuum, the vacuum gets filled. And people think the worst. Oh God. Whereas if you keep communicating regularly and you say, I'm going to communicate here, and then I'm going to communicate here and here, and if we're going to try and hit this target and this target, and if we do, this is the outcome. If people feel there is a sense of leadership and a sense of a plan being executed, and they can do their bit to help that plan, it's great because they're busy and there's no vacuums left open for people to create. So again, go back to the kindness question. Kindness at the end of the day is about treating people the way you'd like to be treated yourself, having the interest in people that people feeling they've got an interest, treating them as human beings, treating them as adults, telling them, the good things and the bad things that are out in the future ahead and how you have a plan, hopefully to get around the good things. But if you don't, these are the things we're going to have to address. It's that sort of authenticity, that transparency, that regular communications, that interest in people. If you have all of those, you'll bring people with you.
Yeah, and as you say, it's that sense of belonging, and I guess trust is obviously a key part of that,
Yes.
But when you say that, in terms of how you communicated at the beginning of the crisis, I mean, that's your decisive leadership coming out there. So while there's a lot of vulnerability, you were still being very decisive in terms of the directions not changing. We're still headed in this direction, but also remarkable that the hit was taken at the top as opposed to the other way around, which can often.
I'm not saying, Jesus, the gospel according to Feargal. I mean, it was consistent with the values. It was consistent with the culture we created. And for me, the first 4 years of my role, I love my role. And in the first 4 years, my two focuses were massive growth and D&I, diversity and inclusiveness. And we grew the business 50% between June 15 and June 19. And there was a sense of you were hanging on to a rocket and you were trying to guide the rocket, and it was exhilarating, it was wonderful. Then the rocket crashed, and when the COVID crisis came. But paradoxically, I'm almost more enthused about my role, because there's a real sense of now, this is totally different to my first 4 years. It requires a new approach and a new skill set. And, I have to say, it sharpened my senses more. And I think, and maybe it's just me, I think times of crisis bring out the best of me, because my personally, I just feel my focus sharpens. And okay, there's things need to be done. We need a vision, we need a plan, we need execution against that plan. And also, the one thing I've really learned since 2015 is it is all about the team. It is all about your leadership team. And yes, the leader is important, and the leader sets a tone, and the leader, has to get everybody focused. But you're only as good as your team. And I am fortunate to have a brilliant team around me. And it's creating those bonds and that camaraderie and that unity of purpose and unity of focus. And when we sat around the table on we closed the office on Friday the 13th of March, and we had a virtual meeting on the Monday. We started having leadership team meetings over March and April. We started having leadership team meetings every 2 days, and literally we determined what are our principles, and we communicated those principles. We set up 5 work streams. We execute against those work streams. Our financial issues, how we, everything from extending our overdraft facility to reducing our working capital, communicating with our people, the wellness of our people, making sure our people were safe, and engaging with our clients, and all those sort of work streams. It's yourself. If there's something awful that you're dealing with, the best thing you can do is have a plan. What am I going to do?
Yeah.
When am I going to do it by?
Yeah.
What I hope the outcome is going to be.
Yeah.
And I think certainly talking to other leaders around town of other organizations, I think that if you have a team that's like, if this crisis had hit my leadership team in the first year, it might have been different, but we're used to working together. If you've got a cohesive leadership team, but there's unity of approach, unity of purpose, and I think that helps you then. And then it's just about executing against a plan that you pull together. So it's
But when you talk about the culture side, and we have a question here about where we're going to go in the future with kindness, but let's just park that for a moment. We come back to it. When you talk about culture, Feargal, and it's interesting. We had an organisation approached us about 2 years ago, and they'd done quite a good bit of work on culture. They felt, and they had a nice brochure, and had, this is the new culture, and they asked, could we maybe help them? And so they sent everything over, and you sort of say, well, what's the problem? I mean, everything looked, really, really good. The problem was that nobody was actually living by the culture. So they had gone through that work, and yet, as you say, they weren't walking the talk. Now, you've talked about how you walk the talk in the period of a crisis, where you didn't flinch from what you had set as your values and where you wanted the culture to be from the outset. How important do you think, for people that are listening, how important is kindness then as part of how you go about designing the culture, and how do you actually bring it to life? How do you actually make it happen?
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I suppose, first of all, I have a view of culture. Culture is not about what you do, it's also about what you tolerate. And, if you tolerate things which are inconsistent with your culture, you might as well not have the culture. And like you could spend all day, every day reading books on culture. I'm not a huge... I read a few books on culture. The one that stuck out, I'm a big sports fan, any sport, no matter what it is. There's a book called The Score Takes Care of Itself, and it's about the San Francisco 49ers coach, Bill Walsh, and it's about the culture they built. And I would have talked a lot to Joe Schmidt when he was the Irish coach, and Stuart Lancaster as well, a big rugby fan. And they're fascinating on culture. They really are fascinating on culture and leadership. And Stuart Lancaster talks about when he took over as coach of the English team, how the culture was all wrong, and he had to basically drop players because, not that they weren't good enough, but that they were damaging to the organization. And I suppose the importance of culture shaping an organization is massive. I mean, I would have trotted out when I was doing my BCom and my DPA, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I never really knew what it meant until I ran a unit within our team. It's, strategy are words on a page, and execution of strategy is hugely important, but culture just dwarfs it all. Mm-hmm. Culture is the thing, but it's the glue that brings the whole thing to life. And kindness, it's funny, when we started revising our culture in 2015, not revising it, but sort of rebasing our culture in 2015, we were doing it at a global level as well. And in parallel, we were doing our own local version. And we came up with basically pretty much the same thing. We were able to map them across very quickly. But one value which emerged, which frankly wouldn't have made the list 10 or 15 years. So one of our 5 values is care. Mm. Now the others are acting with integrity, which is, whether it's profitable or popular, you do the right thing every day. One is working together. One is making a difference. One is reimagining the possible, which we've done a lot over the last 9 months. But one is care. And frankly, the organization I joined in 1986, straight from UCD, partners were still called Mr. Some of them were still called Mr. Care would have been well down the list. And care, I define care as looking out for and looking after yourself, and looking out for and looking after your friends and colleagues. And when we started care in 2015, it was around physical care. It was around, walking up the stairs rather than, and we did a lot of great stuff around that. And very quickly, we evolved into mental care. And for me, it was a really interesting journey because I come from a generation where it didn't really talk about mental health. It was sort of seen maybe as a weakness. And we have transformed the organization. We went 1 year. We have mental health courses, and we have a mental health helpline and everything. We went in a year, about 3 or 4 years back, where between 1 year and the next, we trebled the number of people attending mental health wellness courses, and our helpline took 3 times the amount of calls. Wow. Do I think our work environment was 3 times more stressful than the year before? Absolutely not. But what we did was, I talked openly when I do staff briefings about mental health, and we got to a position where we're saying mental health is just like physical health. Mm. You got to work on it from time to time. You got to, and I believe we have removed the stigma of mental health. That people suffering mental health issues is like people suffering physical health issues. There is no difference. Mm. And that kindness thing is, again, a recognition. And again, we introduced a partner wellness course last year, and more than half the partners signed up for it. If we had introduced that partner wellness course in 2000, I would say 10% of partners, fewer than 10% of partners would have signed up for it. And again, it's that recognition of work is just one part of your life. Mm. And you take an holistic approach, when I wake up in the morning, am I thinking about work? Yeah, but I'm also thinking about, it's Valentine's Day, did I get my card yet for my wife? I'm thinking about my daughter who's doing her Leaving Cert. I'm thinking about my son who's in TY. I'm thinking about my mum who I bought a book for, and I hope she gets it. And, she's down home. I haven't met her for a few months. Work is just one part of the overall cadre. So, when we talk about kindness and where kindness fits in, at the end of the day, I don't care if you're Apple or Intel and you make things, or you're PwC or somebody else and you're a people business. And the people are, and it sounds trite and it's a cliche when I say it, the people are the asset on your balance sheet that actually generates the most value. Mm. And for me, if I can tell an anecdote, about a year ago now, I got a call from a client, and this client said to me, and this client, I know him well, but he can be a bit of a kind of he can stir it a bit now and then, let's put it that way. And he rang me, and I'm thinking, okay, I wonder what this call's about. And he said, I have a story to tell you. And I'm thinking, okay, this could be one of those stories out to prod the bear, or it could be one of those stories that's good. He said, I was on a train to Galway, he said, last Friday. And he said, I was down visiting people, so I thought I'd take the train for a change. I hadn't taken the train in years. He said, so I'm in one of the 4-seaters, and we're just taken out of Houston Station. I'm tapping away on my computer. And he said there were 2 women sitting each side of each other on the other 4 seats in the days where you didn't have to socially distance. And he said there were young women in their early 20s, and they clearly knew each other from home. And he said, but they hadn't seen each other for a while and they were catching up on each other's lives. And one said to the other, "You're working in PwC, aren't you?" And the first girl said, "Yeah, I am." And the second girl said, "What's it like there?" Now, at this stage, I could feel a small bead of perspiration kind of go down. I said, this story is going to go one of two ways. And the first girl said, "I love it." She said, "It's a wonderful organization. The people are really fantastic." She said, "It's a real team place. Everybody gets all together. There's a team, there's a goal." And she, for the next 5 or 10 minutes, she just waxed lyrical about PwC. And I'm sure that guy told the story to about 20 or 30 different people. But it did strike me, what would have happened if she said, "Oh, it's awful. I hate it. The people are awful. The culture is awful." He would have told about 40 people that story. But it does come back to, for me, and it's been an evolving journey over life where I went from being task-orientated, get the thing done, whatever it takes, get it done. I've evolved over my life to somebody saying, "You know what? If you can have," in my case, my cadre of 3,000 people, and if they feel that sense of pride, if they feel that sense of a culture, and whether we're in clubs or organizations or drama society or anything, when you're in an organization that you feel an affinity to, because the people are the same as you, not the same type, but they share the same outlook and culture and value. If you as a leader can really focus on the people agenda, and if you can have your people coming in the morning saying, "I'm proud to be a part of PwC, I like the people I work with, I share the same culture," because I have evolved a personal philosophy of, I want people to change our organization. Yes, we are hierarchical. I'm the managing partner, there are partners, there are directors. It's a hierarchical organization, but I want people to change the organization. People will only change the organization if they feel empowered to do it. They will only feel empowered to do it if they're comfortable in who they are and accepted for who they are. They will only feel that if they are treated for who they are as human beings, irrespective, as one of my phrases, I don't care what your race, color, creed, gender, sexual orientation, or the football team you support, with an acknowledged prejudice against Manchester United supporters. But when you come into PwC, you can be yourself and you can contribute and you can change the organization. If everyone listening on this in their organization, if you can create that where people come in and they are proud and they feel you are treating them as an equal, doesn't matter if they're 10 rungs down, you're treating them as an equal. The most important person in our organization, and I say it to everybody, is Sam on the front desk. Every client comes in knows Sam. Sam knows nearly everybody who walks in. He may be in the organizational chart 20 rungs down from where I am. He is the most important. I talk to Sam every evening when I'm leaving the building. I talk about how was his day, who did he meet, who came in, had he any observations from me on the way things were going. Some of the insights he would give me about
I would imagine, yeah.
Are massive. So sorry, long-winded way of saying it's all about the people.
So let's switch, Feargal, then to think about the future now beyond COVID and getting to whatever this new normal is. What's and going back to the question that was asked earlier, what's your reflections on where kindness fits into the future and this world, whatever it's going to be like in the future? Where do you see it now going forward?
For me, I think that how COVID will change how and where we work. To make that change successful, and successful organizations will be one that can accommodate that. So for me, kindness in the new COVID world will be around accommodation. Again, going back to understanding, empathy. So I have a brilliant director, youngish guy, and just before COVID, he was marrying a girl from my hometown of Athlone. She was a teacher down there. They were building a house out the Roscommon Road. And he was worried about would he be able to continue his job in PwC. COVID came along. He's now massively confident he can do this. There's no issue at all. But I was saying to him earlier, no, we'll be able to make this work. You're good people. And at the end of the day, what's my limiting factor? My limiting factor isn't the marketplace. My limiting factor actually is really good people. So I think kindness in a post-COVID world, as well as encompassing empathy and understanding. It will be accommodating people's different circumstances. I'm hoping we will get more people who might have said in the past, I can't work for PwC because the demands will be too high, or I need to be on the client side or in the office more often. I'm hoping we can reach out to them and say, you've got, 3 kids under 8, you want to live in Kinnegad, and we can accommodate you. And that, the one word I think in a post-COVID work environment will be accommodating. And there's a question there about how do I see kindness reflected in wider society. I think it's climate change. I think companies will lead the charge on climate change just as much as governments. I think, we've embraced net zero by 2030 as a global organization. We're going to make that change. I think actually business has a lot to do then with shaping wider society. So one of my non-work things, I'm involved in the Dublin Northeast Inner City Implementation Group. And, 500 yards from where my office is in the Docklands, there have been some of the worst gang-related shootings in the last 2 years of that. When I see what some of the organizations are doing on the ground to make sure young people don't get caught up in that, it is absolutely tremendous. And as an organization, we're trying to help them. So I think if you've got organizational cultures that value kindness and care and an understanding that your stakeholders are not just in the building, they're outside the building, I think that has a wider societal impact. So I would think as a result of the culture we have in the organization, I'm trying to do my bit in the Northeast Inner City to make sure life is not. So every single child in a school in the Northeast Inner City over the last 2 years has done a TY program with some of the organizations. Every single child. 2 years before that, it wasn't happening. And some of them were getting it, they were saying, oh, I'm going to have TY experience in the local hairdresser. That's fine. They didn't know what A&L Goodbody did, or PwC, or Bank of America, or the GAA, or any of those. Now they're having different experiences. I believe if kindness or care or authentic empathy is practiced in corporates, if corporates then understand that they've got a wider stakeholder footprint, be it sustainability or everything else, in the local community, I think there will be an overspill into the local community.
Yeah. And going then to the question posed by Raymond there, what are your thoughts then on hiring people?
I would never hire somebody that I didn't think would fit into the culture, if I'm honest, if I didn't think would fit in with the culture. And that might, if it's a very senior hire, it usually come up to me if we're taking in a direct entry partner. But it's funny, we grew our own partners up to 5 or 6 years ago. In other words, you mightn't have joined at the start, but you joined before you became a partner. I took in about 5 or 6 direct entry partners since then. The questions I pose when I'm doing this is this a strategic fit? Does it fit with a particular strategic area we have? And is it displacing an internal candidate? Because I don't want to displace an internal candidate. But the third question I ask, and it's the most important person, is, will the person fit? And I can't define it, but that culture, I've talked to people before, and there was one person I talked to, and at the end, they would have been a good strategic fit. They probably weren't displacing an internal candidate, but just all my instincts told me that fit wasn't right. And it's not saying that our culture is the perfect culture. Well, I just, we've spent a lot of time around acting with integrity, with working together. The biggest insult I can give somebody is they're a sole trader in our organization. And this person was a bit of a sole trader. And it came home to me. I was having a cup of coffee with the director we recruited from another Big Four firm. And I had a cup of coffee with him about 6 months. And I said, what are the differences you notice? And the one thing he said that really stuck in my mind, he said, where I came from, if you won, it meant I lost. Or you were +1 and I was -1 by effect. Here he said, if I win, everyone wins. There's a real team culture. And that's hugely important to me. So I want people from, like, we have 64 different nationalities, so we take people from different cultures with a capital C. But there are certain tenets of acting with integrity, team player, making a difference, care, and reimagine the possible. If people really can't change to those, right? If I don't believe they can change those, I just think it's a disaster waiting to happen if you recruit people who culturally won't fit.
Interesting, yeah. And Feargal, going back to what you were saying about, the future of the workforce and the fact that, PwC is very open-minded and there will be people remote working.
Oh, yeah.
How do you, in relation to what you've talked about and building that sense of belonging? So if you have, like your example of somebody living down in Kinnegad, maybe remote working versus, a proportion of the workforce are going to be in the office, where do you see the implications of that and how will you deal with it going forward?
Well, here's one of those occasions where I say, I don't know. I don't know all the answers. As a leadership team, we've identified it as a strategic priority that we're working through at the moment. And it's funny because, at one level, it's how and where you work, but it throws off so many different sub-trails of it. Do you have one national salary for all? Yeah, well, I think we should anyway. But that means somebody living in Kinnegad is going to have a bigger house than somebody living in Blackrock or wherever. Well, that's just the way. I don't think we're into differential salaries depending on which county you're living in.
Interesting, yeah.
And what are the benefits that we would have considered traditional, but there may need to be new benefits. So I think everybody needs to have a monitor at home. They need to have a comfortable seat. They need to have a docking station. They need to have a webcam. So our benefits package will change. But the big thing to me is culture, and how do you create that sense of glue? Because we're, at the end of the day, a learning organization. When I was growing up in here, I watched how the partner behaved in a certain way at a certain meeting, or how he interjected or how he didn't interject, so there was a lot of learning by osmosis going on. So I think our model will be a hybrid model. I'm struggling to think of any role in our organization, even in our back office functions, where somebody could do it from home all of the year. So I think as our thinking evolves, I think there's a hybrid model where people, there's a minimum period of time they would have to come in, but they would be able to schedule it themselves, where you have team meetings, where you do counselling, where you work collaboratively on solutions, where you have a bit of social. We're all going to go for lunch on Wednesday as a group and that. So I think the days of the office will still be important for us. It'll be a place of learning, but how we use the office will be different. So, for example, we're even thinking about, is the configuration of our office correct at the moment? If you're coming into the office to work with people, well, then maybe we should have a lot more collaborative spaces and fewer single-person offices. One of the things at the moment I'm looking at, for example, is the only offices in the building are for partners. And I'm not saying guys being a gender neutral term in the office, since we have the highest percentage of females in the partnership in any firm in town. We need to think about, should we take all our offices down here and work in collaborative spaces? One small example, which I think will resonate with people. We have in our Dublin office, we have 3 blocks and we have 7 floors. In every block, on every floor, there is a print room. And if I think how much I've printed out over the last 9 or 10 months, not much, because my home printer here probably couldn't accommodate. And I'm looking at saying, do we really need a print room? And it's a print room, might be the size of this office here, my home office. But I'm thinking, do we really need that? So I think it's, for every organization, it's going to throw up things. For me, the single biggest thing is, how do we maintain that cultural glue? And a lot of it is, spending time with people. And I see there's a question there in relation to spending time with people. I try and talk to our youngies every so often. And I was talking to one of them the other day, and there's a group she's involved in, about 10 people. And they used to meet every Friday morning for a cup of coffee. They still do meet on a Friday morning for a cup of coffee, but it's virtual. And at 8:30 every Friday morning, they're all there, the 10 of them, and they've got their bagels and they've got their coffee, and they chat for 10 minutes. One of the things our people said, our HR team said, we couldn't have a Christmas party this year for obvious reasons. We always have a Christmas party for kids of our staff. One of them came up with an idea. We would send out, the night of the Late Late Toy Show, we would send out a Christmas box to everybody, and it went down a bomb. And those things are consistent with our culture. They're another part of the glue. So I think you end up doing different things, but once they're consistent with their culture, they're fine. So what's my concern? My real concern is that somehow the lack of physical feeling, touching, we lose some of that. We'll get through it. But hybrid, I have to lead from the top. I will have to spend, I will hope I will spend a day or two a week working from home. Why? Because it's more efficient. Why? Because I'm giving leadership, I'm giving example. If they don't see me doing it, they won't do it. So there's I'm rambling here because there's so many questions we have opened the door to now, and we're saying, okay, what's the answer? One of the things I would say is we're starting a consultation process with our people. What do they think? Because I am a 56-year-old white male, heterosexual, from the country, that's my bit of diversity, living in Dublin. I have no real idea of the lived-in experience of a 26-year-old male or female who's come up from the country now, living in Dublin. I'm removed from that experience. Average age of our people in our organisation is 29 years and 10 months old. I've got to get their input into shaping the future of work in PwC.
Yeah, and I think I think what's really interesting is you're accepting of the fact that remote working is here to stay, and it's about how the organisation adapts to that now and evolves with it.
Yes, and one of the things, and there's a question I see coming in, which was just addressing the point that I was going to deal with. There's a concern of people work from home, they may be overlooked for projects or promotion, they may become invisible. Do you think this is true? We put a big focus over the last 2 years on unconscious bias, and it really, I gave a big yahoo there recently where, and some of that unconscious bias was, I'd call it benignly paternalistic, right? So Mary has just come back from maternity leave and there's a big job has come up. We won't ask Mary because, like, God, we'll ask Johnny. Johnny may have become a dad 2 weeks ago, and I was delighted a couple of weeks ago. We have a New York desk that we staff and we send people out rotation. We've asked somebody who's currently on maternity leave, would they go to the New York desk? They were delighted to be asked, and they are going to go on it. So there may be an unconscious bias in that question. That question from Maria is saying, will there be unconscious bias? People can't see them; they become more invisible. I think no, and in fact, but I am probably more alert to it. That in this new way of work, I actually think, funny enough, it will equalize the playing pitch a bit more, because there was, I think in every organization, there's an element of presenteeism.
Absolutely.
I'm here and I'm still here and I'm still here and I'm still here and I haven't gone home yet. I actually think the new ways of working will eliminate a lot of presenteeism, because fewer people are going to be there at 8 o'clock in the evening to see if you're there. So paradoxically, I think remote working will level the playing pitch a bit more, because if everybody is remote working, I think people who have been trying to juggle careers and domestic situations, whether it's parent care or child care or whatever, and that tends to fall disproportionately on the female population, I think remote working will give us an opportunity to level the playing pitch. People can now see, yeah, you know what? I don't have to be in the car for 45 minutes in the morning, 45 minutes in the home in the evening. And that hour and a half, I can be a bit more productive, or I'm not, so I'm more positive about that, but my antennae are up to make sure that is
good. Yeah. Feargal, there's 2 questions just in the last few minutes just to get to. Is there one decision that you wish you didn't make or you hadn't made?
Sorry, I'm not struggling. Probably, if I thought about it long enough. But I'm one of those people who, have I made mistakes in the past? Absolutely. Have I had 1 or 2 nights where I've lain in bed looking at the ceiling earlier in my career where literally I could not get to sleep because I was worrying so much about decisions that I've taken that turned out to be wrong? Yes. But I am the sort of person that I don't regret. I am immensely privileged. I mean, I'm healthy. I have a great family. I have a nice house. I have a fantastic job, as I said earlier. I tend not to regret things. Have I made mistakes? Yes. Have I made decisions that I wish I hadn't made? Yes. Do I ever dwell on them? Are there any decisions that I look back now and say, God, I wish I hadn't made that decision? No, I can safely say that every decision I've made, I've lived with. Mightn't always have been the right decision at the time, but I've lived with it and I don't regret it. And I'm fortunate. I don't know whether it's my disposition or whether I've been fortunate enough to make generally right decisions, But there's nothing I lie awake about, or in the hours between 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning when you wake up sometimes, there's nothing I regret that I say, I may have made a bad call, I may have made a wrong decision, but I don't go, I did it and I lived with it and I moved on, and I don't want to go into a time machine and say, I wish I'd bought Apple shares when they were $1.50 in 1996. But,
yeah, absolutely.
Other than that, no, I live with it.
Okay, and then the next one then, and I think it's a really interesting question. How do you innovate in terms of networking with clients, particularly in this new post-COVID world that we're going to be in? Have you any thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I love the technology, remote technology. When you and I tested it, Helen, earlier in the week, and the fact that you can jump into tables and out of tables. Funny enough, paradoxically, I would say, I have never found it easier to talk to executives at the moment, easier to get them, because not time you'd say, oh, geez, I must ring executive X or Y, or they might be traveling, or I'll go through their PA. Now I just text them or ping them and say, geez, haven't talked to you in a while. And I was talking to the head of one of the big law firms there 8:30 this morning, who wanted to catch up with me on something, and we had a chat for half an hour, and we were both sharing the same thing. It's easier to get on people's agendas. And I hate selling, Helen. I hate selling. But I love talking to people, and I love sharing stories. And what I would say to people on the webcast is, what I find dealing with my peers at the moment is they want to talk. They want to hear how you're getting on. But they want to share their story, because there's no playbook here, and nobody knows. So when I talk to chief executives, I talk about what we're doing on the people agenda. I talk what we're doing on the digital agenda. I talk what we're doing on the working capital management agenda. I talk what we're doing on the strategic planning agenda. And they talk to me what they're doing. And I get nuggets from that. And I'm a bit like a bumblebee. I would have a dozen of those conversations, and I'll take a little bit from each of the conversations. So when I'm having a conversation, I would say, well, funny, I was talking to somebody else, and they told me they were doing this and that. So a lot of it is about, never in my professional career have I encountered an era where people are so uncertain about the future and thirsting for understanding what other people are doing. Not that they're looking for the answers, they just want to know. So I would say, in terms of networking, reaching out and chatting to your peers, and then taking all those little bit of nuggets and bringing them to the next conversation, you will gain so much from finding. And people, more than ever so in my career, people want to network. They just want to have a chat about what's going on. And inevitably, I've sold a lot of work recently, but it comes from conversations of, tell me what you're up to. I start saying, well, we've done this, that, and the other. And suddenly you're saying, well, could you get some of your people to come and help us with this? Yeah, I'm quite happy to do it. But there will never be an easier time to network. And a lot of it is about, I think it was Abraham Lincoln said, if you ask somebody to do a favor for you, you've created a bond with them. And saying to somebody, would you mind giving me 15 or 20 minutes for a cup of coffee? I just want to hear about how you're getting on in your organization and the things you're doing to address the challenges you're facing. They would, who wouldn't? I'd respond to it if somebody sent me. I'd respond to it. Say, geez, I'm delighted to give you 15 minutes for a cup of coffee, because you never know where these things will lead. Anybody, even if you're shy about networking, saying to somebody, can I have 50 minutes for a cup of coffee? I just want to hear about how your organization would deal with things. And when you chat and you meet them, you say, how are things going for your organization? And you sit back and you listen. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a very good place, I think, to end the conversation. And Feargal, just to say, it's been a pleasure talking with you, and there's certainly no difficulty in getting you to talk, which is great.
Thank you, I think.
Your insights are really valuable, and I hope all our listeners today will take nuggets, as you say, away from it, like your bee analogy. And it's great to hear that organizations care. I think in the age that we're living in, I think particularly in the last number of years where we've come from, particularly on the political side, it is brilliant to hear that PwC is taking that stance. And for you to get that feedback as well from somebody on the train is just illustrative of your leadership. So thank you for joining us today, and thank you for your time and your insights. And you're going to join us now.
Whatever table I jumped into.
See how we get on. So it's back over to Mario now. Thanks, everybody. And please stay with us if you can, and jump into the virtual networking room and give it a go. And thanks for joining us. So I think now we'll all be switched over into the networking room. So we'll just hold now for Mario to transfer us.